Thank you very much, Adam. We will have questions after Joe's talk. So welcome Joe back onto the stage to talk to us about verification.
Hello, me again. So I know I've seen there's already been a few tweets about what I mentioned about verification in our talk earlier on. I have massive apologies to give to Mandy because after she had everything printed in the brochure, I actually changed the title of my talk. So it's not just about verification anymore, it's more about default views on the NBN Atlas. I do want to talk mainly about verification, but I also want to get your opinions on something else. And there's a few questions at the end that I'm going to ask you. I don't want you to respond to me while I'm standing up here, but on your way out to lunch, you will have a piece of paper pressed into your hands, and we'd be very grateful if you could answer the questions on that and pop it into the box, which I think is going to be near where the food's, near where your food is going to be later on. So anyway, first of all, talking about verification terminology. So the Atlas has the ability to enable us to clearly denote between verified data and unverified data. And we have a working group that has worked quite a lot on this, and we've agreed that we're going to adopt this standardized terminology, which is, as I said, the one that's the same as on iRecord. And we've also agreed that we're going to make the verification status of the data visible on the NBN Atlas. So what we've decided to do within the working group is for the Atlas itself, there will be two verification statuses that a record can have. It can either be accepted or unconfirmed, and that will be a requirement on any data that's submitted to the Atlas. If it hasn't got one of those, we will just automatically put it in as unconfirmed. And then in the metadata, if people want to, and we'll encourage them to, is to put the verification status 2 in there and give more information about what they have done to verify their data. And this will be at a record level within the NBN Atlas. And we will have the functionality to enable people to search and filter by verification status. What we couldn't come to agreement in the working group was whether unconfirmed data should be displayed by default on the front page of the Atlas. So there's some reasons for displaying it, or it will highlight geographical and taxonomic gaps in verification capability. Not showing unconfirmed data potentially hides a lot of useful and good quality data, and also people may not be aware that the extra data is available to them to use. And reasons for not displaying it have been given as if you make people have to have a conscious decision to see the unconfirmed data, then they are by doing that making a clear responsibility that they are making that decision to use unconfirmed data. And there's less chance of using unconfirmed data by accident, although you could argue if it's clearly denoted, there's less chance of that anyway. And the other potential issue that if you generate a map from the NBN Atlas and it's put on somebody else's website and they don't have the information about the verification status or the explanation of what that means, that it might get used in the wrong way on their site. So what I want to do now is just show you a couple of mocked up versions, and this is just an example. This is not any particular species, this is not any particular person's data, it's purely a way of me showing how it could look. So at the moment on the default map, which is on the species information page, that's what it looks like. That's just showing all of the occurrence records as they are now. And I should add that the intention to show verification status on the Atlas is so that people have data of known quality. So they can decide, known quality doesn't necessarily mean great, it just means that we know what's being done in terms of verifying that record. And the other reason for doing this is to try and reduce the backlog that there is in verification. So there are a lot of records sitting in iRecord or somewhere else that we haven't got the capacity to verify yet, and they might be records that are submitted by someone who's expert in those species, and this would be a way of improving that time to market, if you like, for biodiversity data. So so that's the original map on the left there. If we didn't show the unconfirmed data, it would look like that. And again, I haven't taken that from the atlas, I've just picked a few so I can show some dots. So don't be trying to work out which species it might be. So if you just had the accepted data, you would get a map like that. Whereas if you had the accepted and the unconfirmed data, you would get a map like this. And hopefully you can see that there is there a pointer? No. Hopefully you can see that there is actually quite a bit more. Adam's run off with the pointer.
It's mine.
It's yours, is it? Okay. There was one on here earlier. So hopefully you can see there are significantly more records available if you had the unconfirmed data. It could be that they would fill in some gaps. And the other thing is that you can still, if we display it in different colours, you can very easily, very readily determine between the two. So that's one thing that one of the questions we're going to ask is, do you want us to not show unconfirmed data, or are you happy with unconfirmed data being available by default? And as I say, there'll be the mechanism to be able to filter by confirmed and unconfirmed, accepted and unconfirmed when you go into it in further detail. And one of the other things that we've been asked by some people, which I'd like to get your thoughts on as well, is the issue of different resolutions being shown by the same size point. And it has been suggested that maybe we should display resolution by default. So each point would have a different colour depending on what resolution it is at. And that would be on the default map. So again, we've got the first, that's what it currently is. If you went to showing different colours by resolution level, you'd have that sort of map, which actually doesn't look too bad and is a potential to do, but that's only 24,000 records. If you then go to something that's got 9 million records, it's much harder to distinguish between them on a map that scale. For example, on this, there's over 1 million records at 2 kilometre resolution, which is the red, and you can only see 2 dots there. So again, it's your opinions. We want the atlas to work for you. So what do you think? Do you think that it's necessary to have the resolution displayed by default at that sort of level or not? Again, that's already, you can filter and you can search and you can colour by the different resolutions already, but they're not shown by default. So that's really all I wanted to talk about. The questions are here. Should unconfirmed records be shown by default? If yes, should they be displayed in a different colour? Should the resolution of records be displayed by default? And finally, just to mess with your head, should they both be displayed by default? And if you say yes to that, I'd love some ideas of how we could do it. So, thank you.
Thanks very much, Joe. Lots for people to think about before lunchtime. So I'd like to now have a question and answer session about all 3 of those talks. So if Adam, Barnaby and Helen want to come up and join Joe, and if people have got questions about what's been happening with Wales, in Wales, or verification, feel free to ask them now. Up here.
Hi, sorry, I'm Kieran from the Earthman side. I'm a recording scheme organiser, so it's probably going to be no surprising. The question is about verification. It's not actually about specifically what we talked about in the talk. I think the iRecord system is a great system to use. But there was talk about working groups and how things were decided. And as a recording scheme organiser, I don't really know too well how you feed back into that. So these working groups, are they representative of the organisations that make up the NBN, or how is it decided who sits on those working groups?
To some extent, I can't really answer that because they were formed before I joined the NBN. but they are as representative as we can make them be while still being of a size that is reasonable to work with. So it ranged from, we did have Barney, for example, was on the verification working group, as was Matt Smith from BWARS, Andy Musgrove, JNCC, iSpot. So we've tried to make sure that as many people as possible to represent the range of different users are on there. And Martin from BRC was on there as well. So.
Alec sharing.
Yeah, and Alec have been sharing it, yeah. Tom Hunt's on there. I can't remember everybody, sorry if I've forgotten you. Claire as well, sorry.
Okay, another question? Over here.
Joe, you gave us a big list of the things that you're going to be working on over the coming couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
How can we influence the priorities given to the things in that list?
Well, that's what the stakeholder groups, the meetings we're hopefully going to hold in January. There will be country meetings, but also that will feed back into the national NBN Atlas one as well. And at any time, if you have any suggestions, comments, then please forward them through to the NBN, and we will consider them. But the main way, we've got a workshop this afternoon where we're going to be looking at what further functionality people might want, and then we've got the stakeholder engagement groups, and we're going to get from that hopefully a big list of things that people want, and by the number of people that want each of them, and then also by the steering groups that work on each Atlas, we'll develop a list of priorities from that.
Thank you. Any more questions? Right at the back.
I just shout, please can we get this Darren and NBN system sorted? I'm also a scheme organiser, and I like a Darren. To me, a Darren should be what local record centres offer, and they should have the data from the NBN. And it's a nonsense. Sorry, I'm speaking just as a poor little record scheme organiser. It's a nonsense that some of the data on the NBN might not be available to them. They each can mesh. Because as far as I know, Darren's data is accessible to the NBN.
Who's going to answer that one?
I guess what you mean by it not being available to a Darren is because of the non-commercial licenses. Is that what you're talking about? So it can be made available. The record centres just need to get permission from the record providers. And we are looking at the possibility of people being able to give like a blanket exemption from the non-commercial. So from that point of view, we're trying to do what we can to make sure that that data is available to the record centre.
Yes, thanks. I agree. It seems slightly frustrating that there's thousands and millions of records which record centres can't use. Our operations are deemed to be commercial because obviously we generate commercial income, as I was sort of praising ourselves for generating money from the private sector. I think it would be great if some sort of solution could be found whereby not-for-profit companies acting in the environment sector could be exempted from the non-commercial requirements. At the moment, the guidance for non-commercial use explicitly cites LERCs as one of the main likely commercial users of data, which would be in contravention of the NC license. So that's something I'd like to reverse. I'm on the NBN Atlas steering group, representing ALERC and representing Wales, and it's something that I hope over the coming years, in sort of the next phase of Atlas development, we can discuss it in more detail than we have so far.
Can I just say something? And also that decision on what was commercial and non-commercial wasn't made by the NBN Trust. It was talked through at the steering groups. And there was call for anything other than personal use to be considered to be considered commercial. So it's not just a decision we took. We have discussed it within our groups, and again, it's one of those things not everybody's going to agree on, but we have to give some guidance.
Thank you. Any last questions? Anyone got a question about all the good work you've heard about happening in Wales? I think it was fascinating because my heart belongs in Wales. So I think what's been happening is, really is brilliant and changing. But there is a question right at the back. Is it about Wales or is it about verification? It can be either.
Verification in Wales.
Yeah, that was the last one.
I just thought maybe the Welsh speakers could give a tip to Scotland following on the talk this morning. If you had one tip on your experience of Wales, what would it be?
That's an interesting question because, of course, in the context of SPIF, there's been a lot of review. But I guess if you took it in the context of the legislation and what we're looking at here, it's about context. And actually, for our decisions and our policies to work, it's actually about thinking about the bigger picture. And it's challenging, but bringing in environment, society as well into those decisions around our evidence base. That's a real key steer we've got around evidence base, right scale, working with people and being brave and going out and actually challenging ourselves with some of the perhaps stakeholder groups we haven't previously worked with on using our evidence. Just a thought. Anything you want to add, Barney? Or Adam?
So I just add to that really. I think what made a big difference for us is that although what Wales is doing and what Scotland is doing are quite similar, we had WIFE and we've got SBIF, and a lot of the approaches are very similar. We work very closely with SNH and with others. I think what is really different to us is the fact that we've managed to get it nailed actually into the legislation. And that really gives us an awful lot of weight to go out and talk to all of the people we collaborated with and say, this isn't just one statutory body, this isn't just one approach, this is actually the legislative driver in Wales now, and this is how we're working.
And I mentioned how I think the scale of Wales works really well as an administrative unit. The fact of proximity, although it does take 5 hours to drive from one end of Wales to the other, we are physically fairly close. Our access to civil servants, ministers, is just on a different league from when I worked in England, and I think it's a great model that other countries should be following, and I hope for everybody's sake in the room that other countries in the UK can learn something from what's been going on in Wales. And there's a vacancy at the Biodiversity Information Service at Powys and Brecon Beacons. If anybody wants to apply for a job to work here, look on their website.
Good plug there. Any more questions? Okay. Right, well, I think we'll bring the session to a close and go for lunch. Thank you, everyone, for your engagement and listening this morning. There has been a lot, we've learned a lot about progress, an awful lot about partnership, and certainly about what data is good for. Lunch is now, from now until 2 o'clock, back in the restaurant, and there's lots of posters and demonstrations happening as well, so don't just eat your food, go and see what else is there, talk to people, and enjoy.
Just wanted to...
Oh, yep.
Yeah. Sorry, just before you go, I wanted to remind you about the bits of paper that are going to be handing out for you to answer those questions. And if you're in a questionnaire completing mood, please see the Natural History Museum's display, because they've got a questionnaire for people as well. Thanks.
And when you come back after lunch, do come back here, although it's workshops, come back here and then you'll be guided off by your workshop leaders to your workshop. So everyone come back here just before 2. Thank you.
It's good. I was worried that people might not.